So I have read about 60 to 70 books this year, and today I want to discuss those that I loved most. These are the books that I have rated 8 out of 10 or higher, and if you're interested in my rating system, you can find a video on my channel. Let's dive in. So the first book was The Odyssey by Homer. This is a translation by Robert Fagles. I highly recommend this, by the way. I've also enjoyed The Iliad, and I think I prefer the Iliad over this one. This is about the journey that Odysseus makes after returning home from the Trojan War. The next book I loved is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. I cannot recommend this book enough. I also have a video about this on my channel, and all of my book review videos, discussions are spoiler free, so don't worry. And really, I cannot recommend this enough. It was so good. I actually prefer this one over Jane Eyre, which was written by her sister, Charlotte Bronte. But this one somehow touched me more, and I enjoyed the writing so much more. Certainly one of the best books that I have read this year. This is about a woman who fled from her past. She tries to build up a new life, but she tells her story in diary form. The next novel I enjoyed a lot was The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. This takes place in 12th century England, and there are so many characters to root for. I also have a review on my channel, so if you're interested in getting to know more about this book and if this would be something for you, then go and check that out. I enjoyed this novel so much that I went and bought all the books of the series, and I am now at part 4. I like reading them all, but this one is the best. You can read it as a standalone, and you don't really have to read the sequels if you don't want to. Highly recommend this one. The next one is a novel that we discussed with the book club, and that was Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol. This is such a funny read. This is a satirical portrait of Russian society, and we follow a schemer who buys the identities of deceased serfs to climb the social ladder. The next one I enjoyed tremendously was The Black Tulip by Alexandre Dumas. I also have a review and discussion of this novel if you're interested on the channel. This is a story about love, betrayal, rivalry, while a man tries to grow the perfect tulip, and there's a lot of political intrigue going on. It's also a very thin book, so a great one to start with if you want to get to know the writing style and the works of Alexandre Dumas. The next one I loved was Middlemarch by George Eliot. I loved this book so much. Was also a book that I picked for the book club, and oh my gosh, the discussions were so interesting. I loved every second of it. It's a difficult one to recommend because it's a rather big one and it's slow. It's very character driven. Not a lot of things are happening. But if you want to know more, and if you want to know if this book would be something you would also love, go and check out my video. We have this richly woven narrative of ambition, love, and reform in a small English town, and we explore the life of its inhabitants. The next one I have for you is The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. This is the Everyman's Library edition, translated by, by Mandelbaum. This was one of the translations that got recommended to me, and I also love the Everyman edition cover and feel and hardcovers. So yeah, I went with this translation, and I'm glad I did because I found it very accessible and enjoyable to read. I did do a reading of the first canto, I think, on my channel. So if you want to get a feel of how this is translated, then I would highly recommend you check that out before deciding which translation that you should get. I've read The Divine Comedy in Italy, which made the experience so much more fun and so much more, meaningful. This is a story where Dante goes through an allegorical journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven, and it reflects humanity's moral and spiritual struggles. The next novel is by French author Denis Diderot. It's called The Nun, and I recently finished this one. It's a thin one, and if you want to get familiar with the work of Denis Diderot, then I highly recommend starting with this one. It's a perfect beginning, and I enjoyed this novel so much, and I actually didn't expect to love it this much. This is about a young woman who gets sent to the cloister to become a nun against her will, and it's a very gripping story. The final novel that I want to show you, because the next section will be poetry and history and letters and so on. The final novel I want to show you is Germinal by Émile Zola. Recently uploaded a video on this. If you're interested, go and check that out. But this is a powerful depiction of the struggles of French coal miners as they fight for dignity and justice during a miners' strike. I know it doesn't sound too interesting, but this is one of the best novels I've ever read in my entire life. Next, I would like to show you some history, biographies, and philosophy books. So the first one that I have here is The Black Count by Tom Rice. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this is about the father of Alexandre Dumas. And his father was a huge inspiration for his works. So this is about his background, his life, how he struggled against slavery and racism. If you're interested in life during this time period, then I would highly recommend this one. Even if you're not really familiar with the author, Alexandre Dumas, I think it's still so interesting to know what was going on back in that time. And it was also written in this kind of way that you always wanted to read on. So I finished this book in no time. Highly recommend. Next, this one is not translated into English because this is from a Flemish author, but this is about the French Revolution, and this was part 2. I also loved part 1. Part 2 was very good, about Robespierre, the revolution, and so on. And I also rated it 8 or higher. Next, I have The Letters of a Stoic by Seneca. I've also talked about this on my channel if you're interested. And I think this is a perfect book for those who are starting out with philosophy and don't know where to really start. This is also, together with Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, a very good one to start with. It's full of wisdom, and I feel like I got a lot of value out of reading this. Next, I have The Letters of Gustave Flaubert by Francis Steegmuller. This is one of the best non-fiction books that I have ever read. This is kind of a combination between the letters of Gustave Flaubert, who has written Madame Bovary. I hope you have heard of that novel. It's a very good one. I love reading Flaubert as a novelist, and so I was very excited to start reading his letters. It seemed like a very interesting read. I had no idea that I would fall in love with this so much. It resonated with me in a way that I cannot describe. It's so interesting to get to know what he was reading, the authors that he loved. He even had contact with Victor Hugo, and I loved getting to know what he thought of him, how he described him when he saw him at dinner parties, and I feel like he was just such a smart man. He loved Don Quixote, for example, and I'm just going through looking for a quote. I'm still reading Rabelais, and I've also taken up Montaigne. I even intend later to make a special philosophical and literary study of these two men. Like, this man was so inspiring, and I cannot say more than that he inspired me greatly, especially by how serious he was about literature and reading and studying the authors that he loved and that he admired. I would especially recommend this book to readers who are authors and who love reading the classics. So if you're both, then you cannot miss out on this novel. You will love it to pieces. This is one of those novels that you keep on your nightstand and that you open from time to time to read some of the quotes. The only way not to be unhappy is to shut yourself up in art and count all the rest as nothing. One's pride, if it is well-founded, makes up for everything else. and so on and so on. So really interesting. The next one I also read in Italy, and I also bought it in an Italian store. It is The Story of My Life by Casanova. This is a biography. It is so good. It is written like a novel, and I cannot believe what this man went through in his life, like from childhood to his death. His story is so interesting. Also a great translation, so if you can find the Penguin Classics translation of The Story of My Life by Casanova, then I highly recommend you pick it up. And finally, I have some short stories, theater plays, poetry. So the first short story that I want to talk to you about is What Men Live By Leo Tolstoy. This is part of a box set, 2 parts from Every Man's Library. And What Men Live By is a short story. Usually, I tend to forget short stories rather quickly. But this one really stayed with me, and it's also the reason why I rated it so high. I think if you have read War and Peace and Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, then it's also worth picking up his short stories because they're really good. And if you don't know where to start, you can always start with What Men Live By. Next, I want to talk to you about The Misanthrope by Molière. He was a French playwright during the time of Louis XIV. And I picked this play to read with the book club, and most of us really enjoyed it. It's really hard to recommend a theater play. You just have to try and see if it's something for you. But I just want to say, don't be too intimidated to read Molière, because he is much easier to read than you would think. Then I also read the Poems in Prose by Baudelaire, and I loved it so much. Usually I am not that fond of poetry, but this was so good. Like, I read it out loud, and if someone would have seen my face while reading Baudelaire out loud, they would have believed me insane, because I couldn't believe how beautiful it was. And I love it so much that I recorded an audiobook of it. It is uploaded on my channel, so if you have a moment where you just want to close your eyes, sit down, or maybe before bed, listen to the audiobook, and then you can go ahead and listen to it on my channel. It is so beautifully written, and I recommend it, especially when you are trying to get into poetry but it doesn't work out. This is something entirely different. And then finally, I have Edgar Allan Poe. I have read The Raven. I hadn't read anything from this author yet, and I felt pretty bad about it because he's so famous, and I should have read him sooner. So I got myself a collected works bound edition by Every Man's Library. I'm certainly going to read more. I enjoyed The Raven very much, and I cannot wait to discover more of his works. Those were all the favorite works of this year, and I would love to know if you have read any of these works, any of these authors, and as always, I will see you next week.